Hello and welcome to Higher Performance Envelope and Balanced Ventilation. My name is Dee Carawan and I am the co-chair of our Sustainability Committee, which moving forward is going to be known as Santa Barbara COAT, which stands for Committee on the Environment. I would like to thank our monthly sponsor, Mission Audio Video, and I would also like to thank 3C-REN and Inbalanced Green for today's presentation and for always giving us amazing content. And now I'll turn it over to Michelle Zimney of Inbalanced Green.
I'm sorry, my screen is frozen. I can't stop sharing. Are you guys there?
Yeah, we're here.
We're here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's definitely a slide aided presentation.
It might let me do it anyway. Michelle, is that working?
I'm not seeing it. Are others seeing the slides?
I think
No, I'm not seeing this. I'm not seeing the slide.
you'd think
Okay.
after a few years we'd have all this stuff figured out now.
Tara, have you
Oh, there
gone
we
in
go. There we go.
There we go. Great. So next
Cool.
slide.
Okay.
Welcome everybody. My name is Michelle Zimney from Inbalanced Green Consulting, and we are co-hosting today's webinar on higher performance envelope and ventilation. The co-sponsor is 3C-REN. 3C-REN's representative wasn't able to make it today, so I'm going to quickly run through their slides and then introduce our staff from IBGC and get us on our way. Most of you know already that 3C-REN is Tri-County Regional Energy Network, and they are funded by taxpayer dollars, or ratepayer dollars, I should say, to the utility. They provide services to both building professionals and households, as we'll see shortly. Next slide. They've got three main program areas: the Energy Code Connect, the Building Performance Training, Home Energy Savings. Energy Code Connect is largely a service for building professionals. It supports the Energy Code Coach program, where you can email or write or call and with your questions about the energy code. They also provide training and support in regional fora. Every quarter, they've got a great topic, and I don't know what the next one is, but it's always great, so keep an eye out. The Building Performance Program, of which this webinar is part, serves current and prospective building professionals, providing sort of trainings on technical skills as well as soft skills, marketing, sales, and whatnot. Next slide. And the Home Energy Savings Program is, as far as I know, still kind of ramping up. They are bringing specific programs into it, but it targets residential and multifamily home owners with no cost technical assistance, and then some rebates and incentives for different energy savings measures. Today's presentation is Higher Performance Envelope Ventilation. Our presenters are Jen Rennick and Mike Horgan, and I'll just do a quick intro and hand it over to them. Jen, do we have a slide with our people, or is this it?
We are the people, and this is our slide.
Okay, good. Jennifer Rennick is a certified energy analyst with Inbalanced Green Consulting, as well as a licensed architect and an all-around sort of energy code guru. Mike Horgan is a licensed contractor, as well as a passive house consultant. He helps us with all our technical questions on the ground and really knows how to get it done. So together they make a great team, and I'd like to hand it over to them today. I will be moderating in the background the chat. So if you do have questions, go ahead, load them in the chat. I'll be tracking them. If there's an opportune moment or it seems urgent, I'll just interrupt and get your question answered. Otherwise, we do have time allotted at the end for questions to also be queued up for Mike and Jen. With that, I'll hand it over. Mike and Jen.
Sweet. Thanks, Michelle. We have 40 slides of content that we're going to try to get through. Michelle introduced us, but we always like to say, I know a good handful here have been in some of these workshops with us, but nobody in this workshop is a guinea pig. The things that Jennifer and I talk about are things that we've done in the field separately together, or coming up in the future together on new projects as well. Most of the slides used are projects we have, I've either built myself or Jennifer's designed and we've worked on with our own hands. There's a few in here from some other friends around California, but most of it is from projects that we have actually done. So we're not standing on a pulpit telling you what to do. We're, these are things we are doing actively right now. And we've made lots of mistakes. So you don't have to make all of the mistakes because we can tell you what we did wrong and what works right. So that's probably the biggest advantage of this. Here are our learning objectives for your AI credits. I don't need to read all of them and we will just move on. So higher performance envelope and ventilation, we are going to tweak this a little bit and call it ventilation and envelope. I'm working two screens here. So if I'm looking off to one side, I'm still actively paying attention, but we collectively decided that ventilation is really what should be driving some of the design in our buildings. And we're saying ventilation first because people first. This old adage that buildings need to breathe is not really true. Like a barn will last forever, sure, because it's always possible for it to dry out. Buildings don't need to breathe. The people inside need to breathe, and the people inside need fresh air. I'm sure we have all had clients who we probably wish would stop breathing, but the reality is that we have to design to all of our clients being able to breathe effectively and with fresh air. So we're going to go through ventilation first. Here's our agenda for the next 38 slides or so. Why do we call this higher performance? Well, there's a whole world of high performance building. It's all over social media. It's the building science community is really flourishing right now. A lot of it is aimed at, the idea and the practices of building in a place where I came from, like a coastal New England environment, where more is better, and you're adding 11-inch TJI Larson trusses to the outside of a building and then packing those with insulation. Those kinds of things aren't needed in California. We benefit greatly from very small increments of higher performance. So our high performance in California doesn't look like a house in Switzerland or even a house on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It looks a lot like the houses that we're already building. They're just a little bit better. Not just houses, buildings as well, commercial buildings. So this is all broadly applicable, of course, and we're taking practices from around the world, places around the world that I've built and seen their practices and bringing them kind of back here and to this region on the Central Coast. But we're taking all of that and focusing largely on our Central Coast area, our Santa Barbara to Monterey kind of region, which has 16 different microclimates in and alone. So a lot to pay attention to. I don't know why I thought of this Wheel of Fortune. We have this slide in here all the time. These are largely the 5 principles of Passive House. And I thought, God, Passive House is so great because it's really simple. It takes these giant code books and just says, well, do these 5 things really, really well. And then you almost don't have to pay attention to a lot of the other stuff because it all is applicable just on this little Wheel of Fortune. So all of these things work with each other cohesively, coherently, continuously with each other, but particularly the envelope and the ventilation play a major role in all of these other aspects working well together. We're using this Wheel of Fortune to guide most of the work that we're doing now. So with that, we're going to head into ventilation and we'll move through this, then we'll move into the envelopes, then we'll have a question and answer period at the end. We enjoy if you can put questions in the chat. Michelle will stop us so we don't go down a rabbit hole too far, and we can answer them if they're applicable, and if not, she'll just hang on to it till we get to the end. So, but please ask lots of questions. The idea of this is a broad brushstroke, and hopefully it generates conversation in your own offices or amongst your other colleagues down in Santa Barbara.
Hey, like Mike said, buildings don't need to breathe. People and our pets need to breathe. We need fresh air. And of course, we know that a lot of our appliances, like if you're running combustion appliances, it actually lets off air pollution into the house. And we know a lot of our fabrics and packaging and furniture and cleaners also outgas, but also there's resiliency in the terms of California. There's a potential for fire. So it is good to have a system where we can tighten up the house and keep the outside out when we need to. And also some people suffer from allergies. So it's also another good reason to have filtered clean air that comes into our houses. What we really kind of the old school was, well, if you need fresh air, just open up a window. And well, maybe that was okay the way our older style of buildings used to have so many leaks and pinholes and unsealed areas that you open a window for added ventilation, but your building was very leaky anyway. And now with the new code cycle, it's actually not permissible to have an open window as the only form of ventilation. So you do have to provide mechanical ventilation system, not just that it's provided, but the code also was clarified in this go around to say that the window isn't a permissible way, even though you shall provide mechanical ventilation. So that means we have to have a continuous supply of fresh air. And there's a few ways the code allows us to do it. We can use exhaust or supply only. We can use a central fan system that's part of our heating and cooling system, sort of. We're going to talk about that for a minute. And we can use balanced ventilation with heat recovery, which means supply and exhaust for that system. We're going to go over some of those things today, but I want to take a little sidebar here. What we're noticing as we do the consulting work is that in the code and the way architects and builders and our clients talk about fans, they often conflate 3 different types of fans systems. So we want to tease that apart a little bit. So when we say exhaust fan, we're talking about the kind of exhaust fan you'd have for your kitchen, your bathroom, maybe utility room. That exhaust only fan, if it's set up to run continuously, is a permissible way to ventilate your house as far as indoor air quality, fresh air. Now, whole house fans, which you hear come up, those specifically are meant for cooling your house in a climate zone where you want to use high-powered fan, open up your windows, pull in a lot of cooler air into the hot house and attic and exhaust it out. Now that is a credit in Title 24, but that is different than whole house ventilation, balanced ventilation for indoor air quality, either with or without a heat exchanger. Often these are small ducted systems or compact ducted or through the wall systems. And we're going to go over a little bit on that, but that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today is the whole house ventilation for indoor air quality. Why are we spending so much time on that at the front end of our envelope talk? And that's because we want to be clear that the mindset is address the needs of the occupants for comfort and fresh air. And those kinds of decisions, once you establish that baseline, then a lot of the other things, decisions you're going to make about the envelope fall into place. And when you take that as a whole, you're going to have a much higher performing building, house, and other structure. So the exhaust only, or technically it could be a supply only. Think like a bathroom fan, but it's, you know, pulling air from the outside and dumping it into the space. That positively pressurizes your house or your building, which means it's forcing air through the assemblies. that can be a problem in a lot of our central coast climate zones because that air inside goes through those wall assemblies, finds a cold surface and condenses moisture and can lead to rot. And we have lots of evidence of that. Any of you who do a lot of remodel work, you've probably seen the mold and all the dirt that's collected on the backside of old fiberglass batt insulation, for example. And our exhaust only, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say a quick example. I know this is Santa Barbara, but I mean, we have full towns up here where every home you work on, you know, Cayucas, Los Osos, Morro Bay, as soon as you open up a wall, these houses that were built in the 70s and 80s by folks who came from the Central Valley and, you know, came here and started building and used the same practices as the Central Valley, these homes on the coast are filled with mold and mildew every time we open up a wall. And this is why.
Yeah, and it's a combination. And the exhaust only, oh yeah, technically it meets Title 24, but now it's sort of the reverse issue where because of our coastal climate zones, we've got many times where the outside air is really high with moisture and we're pulling that through our wall assemblies. And then it's getting those wall assemblies loaded up with moisture, and then the sun comes out and we get something called vapor drive, and we get lots of moisture driving in all sorts of directions. Again, leads to a lot of mold issues and resiliency issues. So real quick, we can do a balanced ventilation that includes bringing in your fresh outside air in through your central heating and cooling system, but it's not that easy to meet code that way. And you do have to have a separate fan system that's able to not operate the main central fan that you use for heating and cooling, but it allows you to take that fresh air through and utilize some of the existing ducts. So it does require additional motorized dampers and controls to ensure that whole thing is working. So it complicates it a little. A lot easier than that sometimes is to add essentially two fans that work together. One fan exhausts the air outside and another fan supplies the air inside. They're wired together. This is a solution we're seeing in multifamily projects. It's kind of a low-tech, lower cost solution. The downside is that for some of the climate zones where the air is really hot or really cold, it introduces that air unconditioned into the space. But it does work with a tight envelope. It's a good system. It can be cost effective, especially for some climate zones. Next step up from that, what we highly recommend is the balanced ventilation with heat recovery. So essentially what that means is that now the exhaust air and the incoming air pass near each other through a specialized material with lots of surface area for heat exchange. So the air never touches, you know, the exhaust air and the incoming air don't touch each other, but the heat is able to transfer into the medium and then into that other airstream. So it tempers the air as you introduce the air inside, which improves comfort and can improve your energy performance of your house. Now, we're going to go over a few of those systems. And this just gives you a kind of a diagrammatic view, and then also just shows you what these, they look like filters, but they're a multi-finned, high surface area medium that allows for a very thorough heat exchange. Some of these have quite high efficiencies, other of them, you know, not so. It depends on the brand, but feel free to ask us some questions about those too, if it comes up. Again, this just kind of diagrammatically show you the concept of how effective they are, especially if you're in a really cold climate. They're just absolutely necessary. Most of the time, our central coast climates are not that extreme, but we do have some places in our Tri-County area that are quite hot, and having a heat exchanger to keep those cooling loads down can also be really beneficial. And Mike, feel free to jump in on any of these.
And just stories from the field. I look at this one
Yeah.
and I always think like, there's this vision of California being warm and comfortable all the time. And yet all of us show up to work every morning in, wool jackets and beanies. And yeah, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we're warm if we're working outside, but for the first 3 hours in the morning, we're pretty cold. And then once that sun starts to go down, especially in the winter, it's pretty cold again. And we just had a conversation this morning on the site with someone showed up in a t-shirt and was freezing. So we're all fishing around in our cars and trucks to find an extra sweatshirt or a jacket to give to them so they could work. So yeah, in the middle of the day, it's fantastic. But our climate is, widely varied. Our diurnal swings are pretty, I don't want to say monumental, but pretty dramatic. So this does matter, and it does benefit us a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because even when we're looking at like climatic data, and I think about, okay, when we're in architecture school and we take our building science class and we're looking at, okay, what are average temperatures? And then you have to ask yourself, okay, yeah, average temperature. So you could have a climate that's tropics where it doesn't change much between night and day, and you get an average temperature that's comfortable. And then you can look at your average temperature, like up where I live in North County of San Luis Obispo, Atascadero, and my average temperature looks pretty darn comfortable on paper. But I can tell you that in the morning, oftentimes I scrape ice off my car, and by, just before sunsets, even in the winter, the inside of my car is roasting. So the average sounds great, but to introduce that super hot or super cold air into my house or car all the time is really uncomfortable. So that's probably the biggest reasons we recommend this type of system. Now, when we go into the envelope and we talk about tight construction, it's going to become maybe more obvious that if you do an exhaust only or a supply only system for meeting code, that may be fine for code. But the reality is, we're going to show you how to build an envelope that really isn't going to let that piece of equipment work. It's going to be fighting itself all the time. So the best thing to do is a balanced ventilation system. And Mike is probably going to jump in on this slide, because these are a few of the systems we use, and he's installed them.
Jennifer's shown you, she's shown you this photo with a core where the temperatures are mixing. And that is essentially this. This is what that core is. That's a Zender machine. That's a ComfoAir. I think it's a 350. I can't remember off the top of my head. ComfoAir 350. I have a 450 and higher. So all that is that's just the box. That's our home run, so to speak, that gets mounted in the garage. It's not heavy. That's my tool belt sitting next to it. So it's not real big, not bulky. I lift it up and it hangs on a bracket, like a French cleat, like you're hanging a heavy photo or something. And then on the interior, this is all you see. I shouldn't say this is the only thing you see. This is one version. Of course, there are different versions of these types of systems, and each project is a little bit different. Even on this project alone, we used some transfer cases and had larger ducts running to a transfer box, and then smaller ducts leading from that box. So it varies, but generally, this is all you see. Really easy to put together. This particular Zender system is fairly easy to put together. All I do is throw a plywood box on top of a bunch of tool cases with wheels and run around the house with 2 drills. And it really couldn't be easier. It comes, it's this, is it German or Swiss? I can't remember. I think it's German. So you get the instruction box and you think, holy crap, there's no way I can do this. I am not a BMW mechanic. And then you start to put it together and think, this is easier than an IKEA cabinet. Like, it's really, you'll spend 4 hours thinking about how to do it and then 4 minutes actually putting it together, and probably curse yourself for spending the first 4 hours. So that's just the Zender ducted system. This is a Lunos system that we've used. It's basically the size of a coffee can. And it operates in tandem. Jennifer spoke about some systems that are wired together. This particular system is wired together where one, call it a coffee can, is in a wall at one end of the house, and the second coffee can is in a wall at the other end of the house. And one pulls air in while the other one is simultaneously pulling air out. And then they switch after a couple minutes or so, and the other fan starts to pull air in and the other one pushes the air out. And they do have a heat recovery core inside them. Those are great. We've actually just used one of those on a small cottage up in Cayucas. So they're great for apartments, tiny homes, ADUs that are, less than 1,500 square feet. It's crazy that an ADU is 1,500 square feet when that's the size of a comfortable home in the rest of the world. But an ADU in California, those little Lunos machines are great.
Okay. So one of the questions that comes up a lot. Oh, go ahead.
And I just want to jump in. There was a little bit of chat going on about how ducting is relevant for these HRV strategies. And it looks like some units do require ducting. The Zender you mentioned is maybe mounted in the garage and then ducted into the interior spaces and back out. The Lunos does not require ducting, it sounds like.
Lunos does not require ducting. It's actually, just happen to have one on the floor. Yeah, this is a ductless system. So there's a little tiny fan inside there. You can almost see it. And they get wired. That's the heat recovery, a ceramic heat recovery core. And this essentially sits in an exterior wall. You do need a 2x6 wall with sheathing for these to fit. But those are ductless systems, duct-free systems, whereas the Zender and the Panasonic, those do have ducts. And we're gonna show you a slide in just a few seconds about how to lay out the ductwork.
Okay, because we do have a follow-up question about, can you show a diagram that explains how these heat recovery units work to transfer heat without exchanging air?
Like, go back. I mean, we can kind of go back and show that those big filter, the ones. Yeah, that one. So
yep.
Yeah, it's if you can imagine that air enters one side of this giant cube through all those little tiny like fins. So there's a through pathway for that air to go through the cube and exit on the other side of the cube and cross, perpendicular to it is another set of channels for air to flow in and out. And diagrammatically, the diagram above is just trying to, in the middle, represent these big cubes of finned material. So the way they're designed is they weave over each other so that the surface area is so great that it easily puts the air into small amounts so that the heat transfers. And yet, the air itself isn't touching each other. So I hope that explains it. And then we can, most of the diagrams, they don't really show you how that is, but those big cubes you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit there.
Yeah, I think that helps. And there's just a quick follow-up, what's the benefit of doing a ducted system versus a not? Why wouldn't everybody just install ductless? Systems?
I'm actually going to hit on that. It's on the next slide. Good question. So if we zip back to slide 28. Yeah. So kind of answer that question and then also give you guys an idea about how much ventilation is required. A lot of times this calculation just shows up in your Title 24 report, in your energy calculation, unless you're doing the house, right now I'm talking residents, unless you're doing the house prescriptively, if you do a performance method and get a Title 24 report from your consultant, you're going to have this calculation embedded into the embedded into it. What we've done here for you is to take that same equation and roughly give you an idea of how much outside air, often called CFM, cubic feet per minute, OA for outside air, is required based on the bedroom and that square footage. Now, those Luno systems, Mike was saying, okay, for a small house, so you're going to look at those Luno systems and see how much outside air each one produces, and say you could get 40 CFM from that system, you could use the Lunos ductless system. If you have the larger house, you might have to have 2 pairs of those systems. And in some cases, you know, would have 2 or 3, depending on the budget and depending on what the homeowner wants, because sometimes I have had clients who absolutely want their teenagers' rooms to have their own system. End of story. And so that happens too. But this gives you an idea of how much air is required. So you can do this little calculation pretty quickly. And then what you'll want to do next is take a look at the product cut sheet for a particular product. So this is a really common kind of ducted ERV. However, the ducted ERV is able to fit inside the ceiling, and it's 2 small ducts that connect to it. And so it's a all-in-one unit, makes it simple. So it gives you the spot ventilation, we call it, with the benefit of heat recovery and a small amount of ductwork. And click on the next button, because that's going to zoom in on the spec sheet part of it. Click again, and then the sheet should come up. Yeah, and so we could take a look at this and see it's adjustable. Your technician who's installing it can basically set the amount of CFM, so that's at the top. Let's say you needed, your project required, you know, the larger one required the 80 CFM, 83 CFM. So you could have 2 of these operate with the 40 CFM. You might have one down in the bedroom side of your house, and you might have another one in the living room side of your house. And then you could have another 20 CFM unit closer to your laundry and kitchen. Just as long as you don't put these in your bathrooms or a place that's too humid, they work really well. Now, if you take a look at the, oh yeah, the little green box that popped up, that's right. Andy, our Cal Green expert, she made sure we had this note. You still need your bathroom exhaust fan with a humidistat, because that is a Cal Green requirement. But otherwise, this unit would take care of all the rest of the house. Now, one of the things we often do is work with our architects and the builders to lay out a ducted system for them. So you might have a larger house, and then you would really want to go with one of these ducted systems. And we map out what the supply line is and the return line, and set up where these manifolds are going to go that also have intermediate filters and way to kind of keep everything quiet. And a lot of times these are just 3-inch ducts that install really easily, like Mike had mentioned.
That picture, the color picture there, the black and white picture, I believe, is a project Grant and I worked on helping to lay out ducts for a big project, I think in Paso. And it is essentially the same system as the colored picture, which is a house that I built, where you can see, sorry, I was calling it a transfer case because I couldn't remember manifold for a second. So you can see that manifold, that transfer box there, where a larger duct runs to that silver manifold, and then the smaller ducts permeate throughout the rest of the house. You don't necessarily need that. We could have run the smaller ducts throughout the whole entire home as well, and been just as efficient. So
yeah, and I put this one in because it matches. This larger house would have those things. Yeah.
And to answer that question that was asked, Michelle, I think generally, you know, when to use a ducted versus a ductless. They're different systems. You can get the same result with either system. It's taking a look at the cost of the systems, the install cost of the systems. We could do, and we almost did do a 3,000 square foot house, but we would have needed, with the bedrooms, 7 or 8 different ductless Luno systems. And at that point I said, well, we've got an open web truss roof. It's going to be much easier for us to run ducts through this system than it would be to install 10 pairs of ductless systems, and probably more cost effective. So we balanced the options and chose the ducted as the simpler, more effective one.
Okay, I'm going to leave you with one last tidbit. As architects who are responsible for reviewing your Title 24 report from your energy consultant, we have been asked to do a third-party review on a few reports lately, because it's possible in the software right now to say that your heat exchanger fresh air system is balanced and it has really, really high efficiency. Really, really high efficiency does exist, but it's like that Zehnder system we just showed you. So what you want to do is look at what type of system you're going for, look at the cut sheet, and look it up on the HVI.org website, because that is what your HERS rater is going to have to do to verify the ventilation. And we have had projects where the architect and the homeowner had no idea that a Zehnder system was being spec'd out based on what got put into the energy report. So if you see an efficiency around 36%, yeah, it's probably one of the more simple systems. If you see efficiencies like 90%, it's a Zehnder or Rensor, or a couple of the other high-end systems. If you see something higher than that, it's probably a big cheat. So anyways, I'm going to leave you with that. And I just want to empower you to pay attention to this and to choose the ventilation system first. Because if you say, yes, we are going with a balanced ventilation system, we're going towards comfort, and there are several systems that have a variety of price ranges, but at least if you commit to the balanced ventilation, then when you get to your envelope, there's not going to be any reason not to make a tight air and moisture resilient construction and design. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike to go over the envelope for our last 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, we're doing okay. It's 20 minutes. We got about 12 more slides to go on the envelope. So I won't go through them too quick. I will say that, again, these are examples. Oftentimes what happens when we do some of these workshops, there is no panacea. We don't have a slide that says, hey, this is the answer and this is the way you should do it. Otherwise, all of the architects and designers would be out of a job. I got an email last night that was 5 paragraphs with questions about details from a person I've never met. I don't think any of us have ever met, who wants to build a house, somewhere in California. And it's this monster email. And I thought, God, there's like 50 questions just in this email. And there are 50 answers to each question. So we don't have an answer. These are just some examples. And ultimately, we're aiming for a goal at the end. And there are many different ways to get to that goal at the end. So for all of us, we keep repeating, the red line theory. And I first heard about this in 2012 or 13 with the first FIAS training that we did. It seems so basic. I mean, that's how we draw a house as a little kid. And we never think like, oh yeah, we want to keep all the stuff inside that house, and keep all the stuff outside that house. So how do you find that boundary? Well, the red line test. And if you can draw a red line around your envelope and not have to pick up your pen, then you're in good shape. Or if you do have to pick up your pen, that's an area that needs to be addressed with the details. So there are generally 4 parts to what our envelope does. We've got bulk water control, we've got thermal control, we have air control, and we have vapor control. Those are the four main jobs of our envelope. So, you know, our buildings are meant to keep us dry. This still holds true. A leaky building is a failed building. Tons of different ways to detail windows and doors, transitions, lots of different products, a lot of tapes that are available now. It's almost easier by using some of the better tapes because the glues and adhesives are so good now that though you want to pertain to the idea of thinking like a raindrop, always being able to imagine a raindrop moving down your building and be able to go from top all the way to bottom and escape. I learned that when I was like 16, when I had to flash a roof sometime, and an old timer just yelled at me, "Think like a raindrop, kid." And I thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea. So just imagine, you know, water moving down, you've got to be able to detail that all the way out. Some of the new tapes, you don't even have to have that. You can actually have them, you know, in the wrong place, and the glues will still work to deter the water. So it's almost easier. So thermal control, this is our insulation layer, and we are often talking about or hoping that exterior insulation is part of your conversation. You know, we're wearing our jacket on the outside. I think it was Joe Stubrick that said, when we're cold, we don't eat our sweaters. You know, we put them on over us. And that still holds true. I mean, that works for humans. Why doesn't it work for buildings? It definitely works for the humans inside the buildings. So at a minimum, you know, these are supposed to keep us not too warm, not too cold, you know, just right, and don't cost too much money either. And we'll get asked, well, exterior insulation, it's more expensive. Well, it is, but you know, we built a passive house. If we weren't going to build it to the passive house standard and we were just going to build to Title 24 standard, that house would have actually passed Title 24 with only exterior insulation. We didn't even need our interior cavity insulation just by putting 1.5 inches of an exterior layer on our house. So can you make it cost more? Sure. I mean, you can buy a Bentley too, but you can buy a Prius and drive a Prius, and you're still going to get from point A to point B. So keep it cost effective, and the way we find to be most cost effective is, you know, look at the option of some exterior rigid, and maybe you don't need your interior cavity insulation, your wall cavity insulation. And then finally, you know, the third and fourth pillars of our control layer are air and vapor control. And now there are membranes where there are smart membranes from Europe. I don't know if there are any American manufacturers yet. Some of the more popular American brands are starting to get into these smart membranes, but they try to do all of this in one. They don't have the thermal control layer for the insulation. They benefit from the other three layers. The three layers that you get with these new membranes help the thermal control layer perform at its best. But generally, you can get 3 of the 4 in one layer now, and then your thermal control layer stays durable and resilient for its entire life. So we're going to use a few examples, and as we've been doing these slides, these presentations, I like to think of it as kind of the same way we put together our estimates and proposals for clients. As we start at the bottom and we work our way from the ground all the way up to the roof. And that's the same way we lay out line items for 600 lines, but we'll go through this in about 10 slides. But we're going to work our way from the ground up and highlight a few points. So starting with our foundations, I've found that using a glass aggregate versus foam and stone aggregate has been more cost effective, because we're getting an insulation layer and our aggregate in the same 4 to 6 inches that we need under our slab. The brand name we have that we've worked with is Glavel. And I think, Jennifer, we talked about putting some of the videos into the chat that we've done together about the installations of some of these materials. I can't put anything in the chat myself, but I know there's a channel that has them. So we are using a glass aggregate in place of foam and stone aggregate. Glavel's the brand name. There are a couple manufacturers now coming online in America soon who are going to be manufacturing these own recycled glass aggregates to be used under slabs. So fully continuous vapor barriers on top of our aggregates, and continuous means that they're sealed, so nothing can get out from underneath your vapor barriers. The vapor is trapped where you want it to be, which is below your slab. And we do that by putting some mastic on any of our grade beams, on our exterior footings, and we attach that vapor barrier to the mastic, and then we pour a slab on top of it. This is just one example. Every foundation is different, every footing will be different. It's just thinking about the continuous cohesiveness of the vapor barrier that will be under your slab.
Mike, can I
I see the
jump
chat
in?
blowing up, so.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. First, I wanted to clarify, were you looking for the Passive House videos that we have on our website to go in the chat? Is that what you were asking for?
We were putting I think Karen has a whole YouTube channel with all of the imbalance and Karen videos that can get
Okay.
put in there. And we've got a couple
Well-
pertaining exactly to this stuff. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to put a link just to our blog that has a
Great.
Passive House, all the Passive House videos that we've made. So that's for everybody now. And there's a bunch of questions. Let me just quick look. Can you address the radon gas mitigation issue? Significant concern in the Santa Barbara area.
Yeah, Jennifer can.
Yeah.
We actually had a slide on this.
In this presentation?
Oh, not in this one, but we,
Yeah, not
Yeah.
in this one, but I did mention it because, yeah, it is a concern. And so there is, I mean, that's like a whole nother workshop. But yes, there is a way to mitigate for radon at the ground level, like on a raised floor. So you can put that material down on the ground and have it a way to collect the gas and on purpose send it up through pipe, PVC pipe usually, but it's all completely sealed, and so that it can go up and out beyond your house is one method. And then similar to this vapor barrier that we're talking about, like if you go to Stego's website, for example, they'll show you some details with their adhesives and tapes and ways to attach it to the foundation itself. But we have even been known to take it a step further and do completely like not ventilated crawl spaces, so that all the space underneath that house is completely sealed away from the radon, and then it's collected and sent out. So PG&E
Really?
actually, there's going to be there's a series of webinars. I know the person who's doing those is really experienced with that. You might want to check it out.
Okay, good question. Another just quick check. Did we hear you say that in some cases, 1.5 inches of rigid on the exterior of a wall would be enough to meet Title 24, 2019?
You heard that, but it was also followed by, because we did many other things cohesively alongside that 1.5 inches of rigid. You know, we had an air tightness that was down to 0.01. You know, we had a passive house air tightness. We had very good windows, another whole workshop that we do. The very good windows really help us with that thermal control layer, because now they're part of the thermal control layer and not a detriment to the thermal control layer. So yes, that's true. We would have passed Title 24 with just the 1.5 inches. But that's because we built to another standard, everything else as well. Balanced ventilation, good windows, really airtight building.
All right.
Yep.
Good clarification. We're sitting at about 10 minutes to 1, and I know that we've got about 15 slides to go. So I will hand it back to you.
Okay, I'll run through this quickly then. So this, you can see some pictures of the Stego vapor barrier that we used. The idea is to keep moisture below the surface. You don't want it to come back up through the slab. Eventually that moisture is going to have to go somewhere. And if it's sitting below the slab in a mud layer of sand, it's eventually going to come back up. And 10 years later, you'll have mildew and you'll have mold and you'll have floor coverings that will start to fail because the glues will fail. No sand, continuous vapor barrier. It should look, oh, that's our project. It should look just like that. So I didn't know that was in there.
Yeah, that's our project. And this actually goes back to some of the radon question too, because it's totally old school to take Visqueen, quote unquote Visqueen, which is a landscaper's agricultural product of not very strong polymers in that plastic that people thought, well, yeah, let's throw that stuff down. And then, oh, it punctures so easily. Let's protect it. So what can we use to protect it? I know, let's put it on some sand. Oh God, it's still getting punctured. Okay, let's put some sand over it. That'll protect it. None of the sheets were sealed. They still got punctured, and it just trapped a whole bunch of water in the underneath the slab, which Mike just went through all that stuff. So the American Concrete Institute absolutely says, get rid of the sand. I think California is the last place that uses sand. We've ditched the sand, but also using something like this product where it's seamed sealed, seamed around everything, completely sealed. You can put another, like a matte material underneath that collects the radon. And by having it all completely sealed with a high strength material, you're gonna mitigate a lot of that radon coming through, otherwise coming up through the cracks in the concrete.
Now, if we're working our way up from the
take over again.
Working our way up from the foundation, we're going to work our way up the wall. We want that junction of where our wall meets our foundation to be sealed off. So we don't want exterior air getting in or interior air getting out. These are just a couple examples of this. There are many ways to do it. I've made lots of mistakes and years later have come to a conclusion of kind of an all-in-one system that's effective and efficient. So I use a sealant on the footing itself, and then I wrap my house membrane into that sealant. So I've begun my waterproofing and my air sealing in one step, basically. Durable and resilient and sustainable. We're talking about responsible. And so why rain screens? Because rain screens are the most responsible way to put together control layers on the outside of a home. They effectively make everything last forever. Why does a barn in Vermont last forever through the winters and the humid summers? Because it can get really, really wet and then it can get really, really dry. And that's it. And that's what we want our assemblies to do. So if you use an exterior insulation with the rain screen, it's able to dry. If you use exterior insulation and don't have a rain screen and put stucco right against it, if there's any cracks in the barrier behind your stucco, that insulation is going to get wet and it's going to stay wet. And then you've got a problem. So quick, this is a mock-up that we build. We always build mock-ups for all of our projects. It doesn't take very long, a few hours to put it together. So you see our exterior siding, you see the ripped plywood that we use for rain screen, just a couple sheets of our roof sheathing that was left over. Attach them to the walls, depending on what the exterior finish was going to be. There are varying degrees of fasteners that we have to use. All of the fasteners are available at Home Depot, so it's nothing extraordinary. You don't have to go to any great lengths. And the middle picture, number 3, that had a stucco finish put over it. The second layer, the number 2 picture, ended up with a wood siding finish put over it. So it's membrane, exterior insulation, rain screen, siding. That's one way. There are probably a dozen ways to do it, but that's the joy of being a creative architect. Considering your thermal control layer, I talked about it already. When we built to a passive house standard, we were able to pass Title 24 with just our exterior insulation. Our interior insulation became an additional sound deadening from the neighbors on either sides. And because we use cellulose insulation, it was $4,000 to do the whole house versus a spray foam, which would have been $11,000 or $12,000. So. And almost done, Jennifer, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. There's some more considerations, and I put this in the slide deck for you guys because, and this is just four websites. You could go to the 475 website on the other one, but basically now almost everyone in the manufacturers that are kind of in this business, they're all offering their details and ways of using their products. And so many of them are using whole systems approaches. And so a lot of the questions come up. How do you deal with this rain screen at the bottom of a windowsill? So Durkin, for example, gives examples of that. Rockwell actually does too. Cordovan does too. MTI Dry, they do too. So take a look at them. But it deals with water diversion above your windows. How do you vent the top of the wall? Are you concerned about those attachments and the weight of the stucco? You know, Rockwell gives you some answers to those. So it used to not be there was much information on this. Now it's just about it everywhere. California code does require that our buildings are tight, actually. So the house wrap manufacturers like Tyvek, like Kingspan, you know, they've all gotten into this as well. And so they offer like a whole systems approach with their tapes and their wrap materials. And so like Mike was saying, you could go to those other websites, look at their details, but basically recommend you stay in the swim lane, you know, for chemical compatibility. And with that, we're going to go into some roofing details and then we'll be pretty much wrapped up.
Yeah, real quick. So I guess the thing to take away from the next few slides is choose if you're going to do vented or unvented and stick to it. You know, go 100% to either one. Think through the sequencing steps that your builder might have to work through while they're on a job site. These water control layers, these air control layers, they are meant to be continuous with no barriers, no thermal breaks, no wind breaks, no air breaks. So if you've got overhanging beams, you've got to think about how are they going to wrap that? How are they going to be able to tape those seams? We can't just leave those things open like we used to. This is one example. This is how I tend to build roofs. If we're able to control the design, we'll design towards a roof like this, where we'll use open web trusses on the inside, maybe TJIs depending on the cost. We'll seal the top of that and effectively build a box. And then we add a vented assembly on top of that with an air cavity. So we have a air inlet at the bottom and an outlet up at the top. I always got a million questions about that assembly. I'm sure there will be more. So if you're using trusses, think about raising the heel. I still see new construction nowadays built without raised heel trusses. And I think it's so easy to just ask for a raised heel truss. And then that junction becomes insulated and you've got a much better opportunity to air seal that junction.
Okay, this is, I guess, asking about how to, so we've talked about the envelope, getting it airtight, needs to work, you know, with our ventilation system, gone through all that trouble, but now what do we do with balconies or big overhangs or decks? And so I just want to offer up a couple of products that are available. This is just a little bit, but it's going to give you food for thought that now we have thermally broken structural connection components that are available, which these are examples of big building projects, but they have them also for smaller projects. We're using some of these broken steel connectors for getting the look of an exposed steel structure for wineries without it really being a big thermal skewer through the envelope. So take a look at, and there's more websites, you could Google it, but these are two products I'm familiar with. The bottom photo actually is a thermally broken system that you then can put your mechanical equipment platform on, so that even those attachments aren't skewering that beautiful thermally complete envelope you created.
And the purpose of that is in this photo at the top, you see the slab layers penetrating through the exterior envelope. That's just a giant thermal bridge. That concrete's gonna heat up, and it's gonna heat up the inside. That concrete's gonna get cold, and it's gonna make the inside cooler. So we want to break that, and there are ways to do that, and they're doing it on high rises all over the world now with these particular products.
Yeah, and these particular products are in some passive house projects in the US. And really the concluding thought on this is we gave you some examples on kind of a residential scale, and then the last slide, but you know, the mindset as a designer is not to radically change what you've done, but just kind of rethink the intention and the purpose. So for example, a typical parapet detail we see a lot is the one down at the bottom. But if you look at it, it's like, well, that they show insulation in the parapet itself, but it doesn't completely fill the cavity. Okay, so it's probably not doing anything. And there's no insulation at the floor assembly. So that's also a huge thermal break in that system. It doesn't pass that red line test. It also opens the whole assembly up for air to leak through, hit a cold surface. You get a lot of condensations. Rotting parapets are really, really common. So this is diagrammatic. This doesn't really show you how to build it, but diagrammatically, think through each of those 4 components we talked about. So maybe it does make sense to do exterior continuous insulation in this scenario. Maybe it makes sense to do a complete cavity fill of the parapet with insulation, or take your rigid and run it up on the outside over the parapet and back down to the roof. You know, in this example, we're doing rigid insulation on top of the roof deck. And then really think about where those air control membranes are. How do they lap? How are you going to stop that condensation, improve resiliency and durability? And don't cause your clients to have to, you know, replace their parapets in 10 years. So that's kind of it for the moving forward. So
Great.
I know we're a couple minutes over. We apologize for that, but we appreciate your patience. And if you have time, we will stay on for questions if people have them.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending
I do have
today.
another slide though. For the next presentations.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending today. We do have a few minutes for Q&A if people want to stay on. And I will be, if you go to the next slide, let me just let you know a little bit about what 3C Ren has in store for you. You do have continuing education units coming your way. I'm not sure if Tara and SBAIA is handling that. If not, Itzel at 3C Ren can help. You'll also be receiving the slides, the recording, and a survey in your email. And she really is hoping that I will remember to ask you to please take that survey. It really does help them out to understand people's needs and their feedback on these presentations. They also have a list of broad topics that they'll be offering in the next few months on the 3C Ren calendar. So please check that out on their website. With that, I'll go back to the Q&A. There is one question already in the queue. And if others want to stay on and participate, great. If not, we do thank you and thank Tara and Dee and everybody at Santa Barbara AIA. Tara, could you let us know if we have 5 minutes for Q&A, or do you really need us to close down sooner than that?
Well, if people want to stay on, we can stay on for 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks like we've still got about maybe 10 folks participating. So I've got one question in the queue and we can just start there And if there aren't any others, we'll drop off. Sound good? And the question is, back to insulating the slabs. Is it wise to put rigid insulation under a concrete slab? Yes or no? And why?
Yeah, it depends. Like anything, it depends. What do we mean by rigid? Well, first, it depends on where you are. If you can benefit from insulation under the slab, then yes. If you're in a consistently hot climate like Florida, or you would not, you'd benefit from the cooling effect of the concrete slab. And in that case, you wouldn't want insulation under your slab. We found here that there's a benefit to insulation under the slab on this particular project in San Luis Obispo in this particular location. And we got that insulation by using an aggregate product, which we would use under our slab anyway. We would have a stone aggregate underneath our slab anyway, and we chose to use an insulating stone aggregate, a glass aggregate. So we got 2 in 1. We got our aggregate and our insulation. The stone, I keep calling it stone. It's not stone. It looks like a lava rock, like pumice, and it gets laid down on top of your base. And when it gets compacted, it becomes almost looks like asphalt. I'll see if I can find a photo of it real quick. It almost looks like asphalt, rough asphalt when it's compacted. And that gives you an R, I believe it's 1.7. I might be wrong. It might be 1.4 per inch once it's compacted. So you're going to use a stone aggregate anyway. You're going to have to compact that stone aggregate before you pour your slab. So we chose to use one that gave us insulation as well, and it worked on this particular project. In terms of the types of rigid, if you're talking about insulation using a rigid product, kind of unfortunately, if you're going to use a rigid board, rigid foam is really the only thing I'd kind of be comfortable using under a slab right now. People are beginning to use rock wool, and rock wool, not rock wool. It used to be Roxol, now it's called rock wool. People are beginning to use that under slabs as a rigid board. So I've seen a few projects done with that. I've tended to use rigid foam boards before I was able to switch to the aggregate. So I wouldn't use Gutex under a slab. Not too many, I wouldn't use cork rigid boards under a slab. But rock wool or Roxol, and a polyiso board if you wanted to use a rigid board, but we use the stone aggregate.
That's great. Thanks, Mike, for the follow-up on that question. We don't have any other questions in the queue right now, and it sounds like Santa Barbara AIA is hoping to wrap up. I wanted to hand off to Dee Carawan just to close us out. Dee?
Thank you so much, Michelle, Jennifer, and Mike, for making this happen along with 3C Ren. And I just want to remind everybody that there's another presentation on February 16th called All Electric Construction within Balanced Green, and you can go to aiasb.com to sign up. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks all.
Everyone.